Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. So, I'm not sure if this is going to exactly fulfill the brief Mike just described, but essentially what I'm going to do is just talk about some of what we've experienced in practice and the things we've been looking at through research of the kind of real-world experience of operating the UK's auto-enrolment programme and NEST. I'm going to move pretty quickly because there's a fair bit I want to get through, but the kind of 5 key things I'm going to talk about, just a bit about the kind of headline, really obvious stuff, kind of what happened when we auto-enrolled several million people into workplace savings, pension savings. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the strength of inertia and defaults in that system, both from a positive and a negative perspective. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of adjacent financial behaviours. I think this is maybe one of the areas where there's the most need for more thinking, and I'll talk about a bit more about why in a minute. And then I'm going to just spend a couple of minutes at the end talking about some work we've been doing on retirement adjacent emergency savings, which is kind of not dissimilar to the Plesser example that was used in one of the presentations earlier. I suspect mostly people are aware, but just in case not, so in the UK since 2012, we've had mandatory auto-enrolment into pensions at the employer level. So all employers have to enrol eligible workers into a qualifying plan. The workers can opt out if they want to. If they don't, the minimum default contribution regime is 8% of salary, of which at least 3% has to come from the employer. NEST is just one plan. It's not the same thing as the auto-enrolment reform, so kind of, I guess, similar to some of the state level programs here. There's a provider, a public entrant provider that's available to employers who wish to use it, but they can also comply with their obligations through their own sponsored plans, through private sector off-the-shelf plans. And just to a distinction that's not hugely important, but I run a thing called Nest Insight, which is part of Nest, but it's a public benefit kind of research program within Nest. So we work with all sorts of collaborators across academics and others to try to use the convening power, the data, the opportunity we have with our now 14 million customers to help understand how the system is working for those people and to shape the system to make sure it can work as best as possible for low and moderate income savers. So look, the first thing here, I think, kind of can't possibly be a massive surprise to the people in this room, but it is worth just restating because the UK auto-enrolment programme is one of the largest mandatory auto-enrolment programs of its kind. Is unsurprisingly, it works really well at the level of increasing participation in retirement savings plans. So much as with many other systems around the world, the UK had what appeared to be a fairly terminal decline in participation in workplace pension saving as a corollary of the move from DB to DC in the years up to 2012. And then in 2012, we switched on the taps through mandatory auto-enrolment, and that decline kind of more than reversed, kind of climbed back to a place where we now have kind of pretty much universal participation in private pension saving for those who we deem kind of eligible, and eligibility is to do with kind of income and age. Thank you. And it is maybe worth just saying that kind of headline finding is true pretty much across any sort of demographic or other data split you can find about people in the population. So whether you work for a small or a large employer, male or female, disabled, non-disabled, more or less the only place you can find a material deviation from that picture is between traditional employment and self-employment, and that's because, like many other countries, we haven't yet worked out a way to apply automatic enrolment to a self-employed population where there's no employer to act as the agent kind of doing the enrolling. And underpinning all of that was kind of, and this is maybe the bit that's important about that headline picture, because of course you'd expect participation to rise, but participation has risen in the UK as high as it has off the back of very low initial and ongoing opt-out rates. So when the policy launched in 2012, the kind of central estimate of opt-out was that it would be around 24%. It's actually hovered around 10%. It was slightly higher when we enrolled the stock of workers during the implementation period, so people who were already in situ in their jobs, but for the new flow of workers, it's actually been a bit below 10%, and it's remained there pretty much throughout the period since. Also very low have been cessation rates, so we distinguish between opt-out, which is the thing you can do in the first month after you're enrolled, and then you're taken out of the plan altogether, given your contributions back, and cessation, which is that you stop making new contributions at some point in the future, but the savings that you've made so far stay there. And crucially, that inertia has remained pretty consistent right across some pretty volatile kind of external experiences for people. So both through the pandemic, where as here, lots of people lost their jobs, lots of furlough, all sorts of different kind of schemes to try and support people. But while the opt-out and cessation rates during that period were fairly noisy, fundamentally there wasn't any major uptick in people opting out or ceasing participation in retirement. And that's also been kind of largely true now more recently through the cost of living crisis. And so what this data shows is that there's been a small, kind of modest uptick in cessation rates amongst the lowest income third of our membership. But actually, if you look at the left-hand side axis, we're talking about a modest uptick from a very, very low rate of cessations to a still very low rate of cessations, and more or less flat among the other two income groups in that data. So the sort of story here is you auto-enroll people at a very large scale, and the default parameters you set within that system are really, really sticky. And they stay really, really sticky, even through things which you might expect to see causing some different behaviours. And just to pick up on something that was discussed earlier, the only thing we've ever seen that's really materially shifted opt-out rates was in the initial implementation of auto-enrolment in the UK. We started contributions at 2% and ratcheted them up to 8% over an implementation phase. And the opt-out rate did go up a little bit when contributions went from 5% to 8% of salary. So when you talk about, I think, Olivia, you were saying earlier, you do see a little bit of opt-out maybe in response to things like auto-escalation. So there was a little bit of evidence of that, but it was still within an overall framework of an opt-out rate that was a long way below where we thought maybe it would be, and definitely acceptably low from a kind of public policy perspective. But of course, the stickiness of those defaults has some challenges associated with it as well, and this chart maybe doesn't work quite so well in slightly smaller form, but what it shows is that for pretty much everybody in the UK, employers have chosen to enrol people at the default minimum rate. There hasn't been a lot of... Employers can, if they want, have a different contribution framework. They could choose to enrol people at 6% and 6%, or whatever above the minimum, but by and large employers don't do that. So 85%, by coverage of worker, 85% of all auto-enrollment's been done at the default rate. And it's also worth saying that in total of the 13, 14 million members of Nest, only 1.5% of those members have ever made any kind of elective additional contribution over and above the level they were defaulted at. And for some people, that's just a one-time, windfall-based elective contribution. For other people, it's regular elective contributions, but it's extremely, extremely low. And then the sort of other aspect of that sort of the challenge of sticky defaults is, you have to sort of start to ask yourself, well, are there some people, the whole point of auto-enrollment as opposed to compulsion is recognizing that some people will want or need to opt out, and you sort of have to ask yourself, are there actually some ways in which these defaults are maybe stickier than we expected them to be, or maybe even than we think they should be? And so some work done by another organisation in the UK, the IFS, Institute for Fiscal Studies, they looked during the implementation of auto-enrollment at, is there any correlation between the degree of financial insecurity of people and their probability of opting out? And they essentially discovered that there wasn't. So irrespective of your underlying level of household financial health, you are still equally unlikely to opt out. And if you go back to that thing about the cost of living crisis, actually then you start to wonder, well, maybe should more people have been ceasing their pension contributions during the cost of living crisis, given some of the really acute consumption choices that they would have been making during that period? I'm getting the 3-minute warning, so I need to fire through. So then just two other things. So I said I was going to talk about the behavioural impact on adjacent financial behaviours, and this is really important, right? So when we auto-enrol people, we want to believe that what we're doing is helping them smooth consumption from now to later. And it's very difficult to know for sure the extent to which that's happening, and lots of people have tried. So we did some work which essentially exploited the randomised rollout of auto-enrolment among small firms to try and look at did debt increase as auto-enrolment was introduced. And what we find is that there is a small but non-trivial increase in unsecured debt during that rollout of automatic enrolment. But interestingly, and not on this chart, what we also found is a small increase in the number of people who had a mortgage, a small increase in, therefore, in average mortgage debt, a positive impact on credit ratings, and a positive impact on the likelihood of defaulting on any debt. So this very mixed picture as automatic enrolment rolls out of some increase in unsecured debt, which you would probably say is a worry, but actually some other behaviours which appear to be either neutral or positive, and there's a lot of work needed to understand all of that, but it's just, I think, important as we think about how properly to evaluate programs like auto-enrollment. Last couple of things. So we've also been testing with a series of employers variations on retirement-adjacent emergency savings. In the UK, we don't have this in-plan, out-of-plan distinction because you can't do emergency savings in-plan because once the money's in a pension, it can't come out again. So we've been testing variations on the kind of out-of-plan model. Some with a rollover into retirement saving above a balance, some just generic workplace savings. What we find in that work is two main things. So the first is, and again, super unsurprisingly, in opt-in models, people like the idea, but they don't do it, whereas when you reframe that as an opt-out model, participation jumps from, irrespective of the baseline, by about 50 percentage points within a workforce. So very powerful tool for increasing emergency savings alongside retirement savings. Crucially, topic of huge interest in the UK, when you do that, do you risk undermining pension saving or crowding out retirement saving in some way? And on the face of it, the evidence would suggest not. So for an opt-in emergency savings population versus an opt-out emergency savings population, opt-out and cessation rates from the pension are invariant, so you don't see any increase in pensions opt-out by offering people emergency savings opt-out at the same time, and the total amount saved seems to be additive, so nor are you forcing people to choose between contributing to the retirement plan and contributing to the emergency savings plan. And just very finally, this is kind of super observational, unscientific data. In the version of this that we tested, which has a rollover to retirement saving, when we ran it long enough for people to reach the balance beyond which that rollover would take place, we started to find at the end of that trial about 4% of people making it to the balance and therefore starting to make additional retirement contributions and doing so at a fairly material rate, about £100 a month. And 4% is a low number, but worth bearing in mind that was on an upward trajectory at the point at which we exited the trial, and is also, if you compare it to the basic, only 1.5% of people making elective additional pension contributions in the broader Nest plan, actually 4% starts to look like a pretty good number. So we have to be a little bit careful. We're talking about quite small sample sizes here, but nonetheless a potentially interesting feature. So I think I might have more or less hit my 10 minutes. I'm going to stop. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but looking forward to questions later on.